Good afternoon, everybody. I'd just like to start by thanking again Brigadier Blaine and Air Vice Marshal Hupfeld for inviting me to speak today. As you can see, I've been given quite an interesting topic to talk about, perspectives and lessons learned on collaboration. For those that know me, know I could probably talk all day about this, but I will try and confine it to the 20 minutes that are available to me. Just also like to point out that I've actually been sort of let off my leash a bit today as well. So the views I'm going to give you are my views. They're not Defence's views, or as just mentioned, not Talis's views either. So I might throw in one or two controversial comments along the way, maybe. Next slide, please. So what I'll talk about today is my experience at RPDE. Obviously, that's been a very interesting experience in terms of collaboration, and I'll give you an example there of a specific example. Brigadier Blaine mentioned earlier Quick Look 141. Which was we were helping with some force design analysis. I won't be using that example today, but obviously there's a panel discussion later, and I'm happy to take questions or separately if people are more interested about what we did there. I'll then also talk about some common themes around collaboration, what I believe are important for that, the benefits of collaboration, not just the outcomes of collaboration, and where do we go from here. Next slide, please. So some definitions here for collaboration. I think it's important that I define what I mean by collaboration, because I've got a very specific term that I want to use today. However, I have to say sometimes I feel like when defence and industry are engaging, it's more like that military definition that we're using. But today I want to use a different definition. So click, please. So today I really want to focus on collaboration when it's between defence and multiple parties. There's quite a lot of mechanisms available to us today for bilateral collaboration between defence and another organisation. Obviously there's things like ASDEFCON, there's the DST, Strategic Alliances, the new upcoming Defence Support Services panel. So there's lots of mechanisms available for that. What I'm interested in are the sorts of collaborations where there's not a neat way to bring the parties together, where we've got those complex problems where defence needs to bring multiple parties together who may or may not normally want to work together, but need to work together in order to deliver an integrated force by design. But I also want to point out, should we assume that multi-party collaboration is necessary for everything defence does? Definitely not. It is something really that we should be focusing on, those more complex issues, all those areas where defence doesn't have a really good understanding of the areas or the problems that it's looking at. So for me, it is absolutely essential for us to be able to achieve an integrated force by design, those really complex areas like integrated air and missile defence, cyber security, EW, those sorts of areas are going to require multi-party collaboration. Next slide, please. So I said I'd start off by giving an example. This is a fairly concrete example, and I think is a good way of describing how collaboration can work. It's not a force design example, but we have others of those, but it is something I think that's tangible and concrete that would be quite easy to explain. Back in 2015, Brigadier John Shanahan from the Joint Counter-Improvised Threat Task Force approached RPDE about a problem they were experiencing or emerging in the battlefield around being exposed to toxic industrial chemicals. The existing canisters that were available for CBRN protection weren't able necessarily to provide a protection for that for a long period of time. We got asked the question, is there a single canister available that could provide that protection? So in response, we brought together a team led by John Velarde, who was one of our activity managers, and quickly established a small team consisting of Sean Higbid from Kinetic, who's a CBRN expert, and also Tim Hammond from Noventus, who is a safety engineering expert. Initially, they went and analysed the existing fleet of canisters, spoke to a number of canister manufacturers, and also approached academia to see what was happening in the research world and tried to identify, is there a solution available? There wasn't an off-the-shelf solution available. However, they identified that CSIRO was working on some technology that was of interest. The technology is metal organic frameworks, or MOFs. For those of you that haven't heard of them, I know Mark Hodge is probably all over them. But for those of you that haven't heard of them, I encourage you to look them up because they're an incredible technology that's been emerging over the last few years. For example, 1 teaspoon of a particular type of moth, in terms of its surface area, is the equivalent of an entire soccer field. So what that means is basically because of its absorbent properties, it can absorb basically the equivalent of a soccer field's worth of gas in 1 teaspoon. So we're quite interested in that. One of the challenges, though, as I said, they've been studied for a long time, but there was real challenges around manufacturing them on a large scale and also remaining stable in humid environments, both key factors in terms of being able to use this in a real-world solution. CSIRO had managed to crack that particular problem. So we brought together CSIRO under the leadership of Professor Matthew Hill and also the team for Kinetic and Noventus to develop a product. We got support from Dave Nielsen from DST Group, whose team provided the testing environment to be able to test whether these things work as expected. And we also have design authority support from Shane Aitken from the Land Engineering Agency. And CSIRO is also in the process of bringing on board a canister manufacturer to actually build the final products. It also turns out that CSIRO reached right back into its network. I mean, this wasn't something we were aware of when we first started working on this. They've really harnessed the capabilities right across CSIRO in terms of their minerals group, their manufacturing group, also involved RMIT and Monash University. For me, I was talking about this sort of thing with Jerome Reed from Plan Jericho recently. Quite often when we engage with large organisations, we assume if we're talking to one person, that person's going to bring everything back into their organisation and their whole organisation's going to be aware of it. I think in reality that's not often the case, and I think CSIRO has done a fantastic job here of really leveraging their network. And for me, I think going forward with collaboration, I think we really need to ask that as a question when we first embark on it. Are we really going to leverage all the capabilities of the organisations involved? So at this stage, we're on track to deliver a world-class canister. It looks like it will be lighter, smaller, and provide protection against a much larger range of agents. And of course, there's been challenges along the way. All these development type activities don't necessarily go according to plan, but I'm pleased to say that all those people and organisations involved have supported each other in resolving any issues that have come up. Our probably big remaining challenge, and it goes a bit to what Benjamin was saying earlier about some of the legacy programs, is great, we've got this product, but what's the path introduction into service? You're probably aware there's an existing Land 2110 program in the CBRN space, but for this particular product, we don't yet know how or if it will be introduced into service. I mean, I'm confident that it will be, but we just don't know how that will happen. So what are some of the key takeaways from this particular collaboration? For me, key one is we've got a committed and engaged customer. The task force has remained fully engaged throughout the whole process. We've had the right people with the right expertise involved in the process. Probably the key one for me is you've noticed I've mentioned a lot of individual names and companies, and I think a number of people have mentioned this already today. It's about behaviours. Collaboration only works when you've got people with the right behaviours involved in the actual activity, and in this case, everyone's been focused on the ultimate goal, which is to save lives. But putting this in place has taken time, effort, negotiation, and an ongoing successful commitment to a successful outcome. Next slide, please. So how do we sort of bring all of that together? How do we make sure those behaviours are aligned? So I want to differentiate between two things. One is the outcome of the collaboration, so what we're actually trying to achieve. So, for example, a broad spectrum canister, versus the benefits that come out of that collaboration, which can be a lot more. So if we just look very simplistically here, when there's a collaboration, defence obviously is looking for the best capability it can get that gives it an advantage in the battlefield. Industry is looking for a profitable contract either through the collaboration or from follow-on contracts, and academia is looking to generate new knowledge. Next slide, please. But as you can see that there's a whole bunch of other benefits that are being sought from a collaboration. Those first one, I suppose, are those simple ones. what you see underneath here are some examples, not necessarily present in all collaborations. The idea is to demonstrate that collaborations generate multifaceted benefits. And for me, it's really important that those benefits are actually articulated as part of the collaboration so that all parties understand what people are trying to achieve from it, so that people remain motivated and incentivised to continue to participate in the collaboration. Next slide, please. So what are some common themes around collaboration that I've seen? First one is put the customer first. Make sure we really understand why we're engaged in this collaboration. What are our outcomes? Some examples of this are organisations like DiggerWorks, FFG Enterprise. The end user is at the absolute heart of what they're trying to achieve. There needs to be a level of trust that is very, very high in order for collaboration to work. We don't want to be in a situation where people don't feel like that they can put their all into the collaboration. And that doesn't mean people are giving away trade secrets or people are giving away classified information, but we need to have a set of rules and procedures that define how people are going to work together. Resources are absolutely key to making collaboration work. There needs to be people with know-how, there needs to be intellectual property, there needs to be funding, there needs to be commercial vehicles to actually make these things happen. And even for the most, I suppose, lightweight collaboration, for example, like an environmental working group or an ADISA meeting, something like that, there needs to be a venue, there needs to be planning, there needs to be travel. So any sort of collaboration requires resources. In order to facilitate that trust, there needs to be transparency. This comes back to those things I discussed before around problems and issues and risks, making sure that they're shared and people understand how the collaboration is actually progressing. For example, with the broadband canister, broad spectrum canister, CSIRO had some issues with manufacturing, RPDE had issues with resourcing, DST Group had some issues with the analysis tools that they were using. So all of these things were visible to all of us and we were able to adjust things around to adapt to those challenges. We need to agree on the time frame. Are we looking for an urgent fix? Is this operationally urgent? Do we need it tomorrow, next week, next month? Or is this a long-term activity? Is it a cooperative research centre? These things help define expectations and also help define the level of investment that's required by the organisations involved. Finally, it's really important that all the participants in the collaboration are adding value. Just because a particular organisation wants to be involved doesn't necessarily mean that they get a ticket to the dance. It's really important that we set a bar, particularly for sophisticated collaborations. We need to set a bar. Every participant must be able to bring value, whether that's expertise, resources, capability, whatever it is, but they need to be bringing something to the collaboration. Next slide, please. So how do we sort of put this stuff in place? Well, there's some good news on this front, actually. Just recently, Richard Hughes, who's the new Director for Program Delivery and Management in the Defence Innovation Hub, pointed the new ISO standard out to me, ISO 44001. So it's only just been released this year. It's a collaborative business relationship business standard. The important thing about it for me is it's only 60 pages long, so it's not hundreds and hundreds of pages. It's quite easy to digest. Now, it's not a manual for doing collaboration. Really what it does is it explains the sorts of issues and considerations you should take into account when looking into actually engaging in a collaboration, and also identifies about 10 different types of collaborations, ranging from alliance-style contracts right through to loose sort of geographical clusters and those sorts of things. So I recommend that document. So for me, I think the main benefit of it is making sure that organisations ask the right questions of themselves and their potential partners before going into a collaboration. Next slide, please. So how does all this fit into the CLC and force design? So this slide here, obviously you can see across the top is the CLC as we know it today. And across the bottom, I suppose, is something I've pinched a little bit from Plan Jericho and their sprint sort of architecture. What that's trying to demonstrate is that across the bottom is that there's periods of very intense collaboration where it's very wide on the diagram, and periods where there's very little collaboration, particularly around decision points for government or when industry is off doing things on their own. The 2016 white paper identified industry as a new fundamental input to capability. I think we've all sort of struggled to really nail down what does that really mean. If you actually read the words in the white paper, it talks about industry being considered as a FIC. For me, I think it needs to be much more than that. I think industry must be part of the capability life cycle, providing inputs into not just being considered as part of the capability life cycle. So one of the challenges we face today in doing that is the apparent reluctance in some parts of defence to engage with industry early in the life cycle for fear of causing probity issues or problems later on. They're not alone. I know some parts of industry have the same concern. If I get involved early, am I going to be excluded later on? Now, I should point out that probity is absolutely essential to a good procurement process. Government, the APS, the ADF and industry have to have confidence that a procurement has been done ethically and fairly and has achieved value for money for government and the taxpayer and most importantly the ADF. But I think we can do a lot better in terms of the way that we collaborate. So if we use a simple thought experiment, and I'm going to be very extreme here, let's assume that Defence, in its own splendid isolation, came up with a bunch of requirements and issued an RFT to the streets and gave industry 3 or maybe 6 months to respond. Clearly, industry is not going to be able to innovate in 3 or 6 months. Defence is going to be expecting a low-risk solution, so there just won't be time for industry to respond. Now, of course, this is an exaggerated example, but let's look at a different assumption. Let's assume that during the force design process, Defence articulated its gaps and opportunities broadly across industry and academia. In many cases, this would be years before any RFTs are under consideration, and Defence continued to engage with industry right up to the gate zero. What would happen? So first, it would have informed itself of the many different options, or in some cases, the not very many options that are available to it. Secondly, it would have primed the supply chain or the industry with the knowledge about what Defence needs. And this could be used by industry to drive its own R&D investments, its own infrastructure planning and workforce planning. And also helps understand what is actually Defence's needs. For me, I actually think this will drive a greater level of competition because there'll be more players who understand Defence's needs, and will also lead to better value for money solutions because industry will be better prepared to respond. I think today we're somewhere in between. My experience in RPDE, there are definitely programs and projects out there that are using organisations like RPDE and others to reach out and gain a better understanding and to share their problems, but it's by no means the standard approach. So one of the areas I think collaboration could greatly improve outcomes is in the CLC, is in the area of risk reduction in both the pre and post-gate scenarios. I have a concern that Defence is not leveraging the experience of so-called below-the-line or major equipment providers as part of the smart buyer process. I understand that there is now risk workshops conducted as part of that process. Anecdotally, I don't believe there is a great representation of below-the-line contractors or major equipment providers at those workshops. For me, if we really want to understand the real risks associated with acquisition and, more importantly, sustainment, I think those inputs need to be included as part of those assessments. I think not including major equipment providers in those risk assessments is actually a risk in its own right. Next slide, please. So where to from here? So some of these things I've already covered, but I'll throw a couple of new ones in there as well. I think, first of all, we need to make publicly available a list of the different types of collaboration models available. Things like DiggerWorks, the Defence Innovation Hub, Next Gen Tech Fund. There are a whole raft of them, and I don't think there's any one spot that you can go to find where these are and take advantage of them, both from a defence and industry perspective. I think this will encourage the take-up of best practice across Defence. From an RPDE perspective, I think we need to re-establish and enhance the functions of RPDE inside the Defence Innovation Hub with a particular emphasis on the pre and post-gate zero activities. We should encourage the use of that new ISO 44001 standard as a benchmark. I think also one of the challenges we face, particularly in Australia compared to, say, Europe and Israel, is the distances we have to face in terms of collaboration. All our major capital cities and many regional areas have some form of defence capability from an industry perspective and from a defence perspective. And I think making better use of communications technology to establish collaborative, virtual collaborative environments would be very, very useful. These could be managed by Defence to make sure that only the right people are getting access, but I think it would be highly valuable. Jerome Reed and I from Plan Jericho also recently discussed the 3-minute pictures that we've been seeing for a number of years now at the major conferences from SMEs and DST Group and academics. We discussed why don't we turn that around and have force design and capability manager representatives also doing 3-minute pictures about the types of problems that they're facing. At the moment, we're relying on sort of luck that the right person is in the right audience at the right time. I think if we turn that round, I think we might get a better response, because I know from an industry perspective, we're always very interested in what our customer has to say. Related to this, of course, is the issue around sensitive collaborations. We obviously have a challenge around things that may be classified. I think what we also need to think about is it the technology that's classified, or is it the application of the technology that is classified? And maybe if we can do a better job of separating those two things, it might allow us to share more information more broadly. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, for me, it's really important that we need concrete mechanisms to make collaboration work. We need business needs, we need funding, resources, we need the commercial vehicles to actually make it happen so that there is trust and transparency in how it works. I know at first look sometimes collaborative models can seem expensive and perhaps inefficient. I reckon the question we need to ask is, if we don't collaborate, will we actually be able to achieve an integrated force by design? Collaboration relies on the behaviours of people. I think Defence has recognised this through the First Principles Review and the One Defence approach. I think we all need to get on board with that and play our role. I've already mentioned around industry as a FIC. For me, that is all about collaboration and bringing industry together with Defence to work on capability. I also think we've got a rare opportunity through what's been established today. We have a permanent force design function, something we haven't had before. We've also got an innovation system led by the Defence Innovation Hub, Next Gen Technology Fund. We have the CDIC as well, providing that front door for industry to engage with Defence. Also, what I haven't got up there is at the moment we have a very passionate Minister for Defence Industry who's knocking down a lot of doors, and I think we need to make the most of that while we can. Lastly, we have passion. I think the fact we're all here today says something about the way we're all thinking. I don't think there's going to be any capability contracts signed tomorrow. I don't think there's going to be any capabilities delivered the day after. We're all here because we believe in the long-term goal of delivering the ADF the best capability that the government can afford. So I'm sure that if we can crack the collaboration nut, that we'll be able to deliver that integrated force by design. Thank you.